I can see you talking, but you're muted, so I can't hear you.
I've only been doing this 4 years and I still got it wrong. Anyway,
We popular Christmas gift was that you're on mute coffee. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. This is the Finance Committee meeting on May 7th, and I'm Kathy Shane, Vice Chair of the committee. Bob Hegner is with us, but he's on the phone, so he can't easily see everyone. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. And my first order of business in doing that is to make sure all the members of the committee can hear and be heard. So I will call out names and just let me know if all is well. Mandy,
Present.
Bernie,
Present.
Andy,
All is well.
Bob Hegner,
Present.
and we're expecting Alicia to join us, but I don't see her here yet. We have, in today's agenda, we have two main items with a subset of items of the second one, but the first is to hear from our annual auditor's report. And I'm going to just turn it over to either the finance staff who's here with us, Sandy Pooler, Jennifer, or Holly, to introduce this, and let Scott and tell me how you pronounce your first name, Nadia. Nadia? Nadia. Take it over. And then the second item on the agenda is, and Matt is here. Matt Holloway is now. Matt, can you hear us? Matt Holloway. I'll wait for him to fully connect. So,
Kathy?
Andy, I see you have a question. Yeah.
Yeah, public comment was on the agenda for the first two. I don't know whether you wanted to just move it somewhere else or
Yeah, I think
you should mention when it's going to happen for people in the public.
I think since we have the guests here with us, we'll start with that, and maybe we'll do public comment in between, because of the participants, the second item is to start with any general comments or questions about the overall budget, but then a focus on the capital budget, the capital plan. And I'm seeing so if people can bear with us, I mean, does that make sense to everyone? I see one hand up of the attendees, but we're going to do public comments in between, right after the auditor's report. Okay, so the time is yours, however you're planning on doing it. And Athena, have we enabled sharing screen if we're doing a share? Oh, and Paul Bachman has joined us as well. Hi, Paul.
Yes, you should be able to share your screen if you want to do slides or anything like that.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay to begin?
Yes, absolutely.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott McIntyre. I'm the partner at Markham in charge of the Amherst audit. With me on the call is Nadzea, and I've known her for a long time. I'm not going to attempt the last name. Nadzea and I work together in the execution of your fiscal year 23 audit. I can't recall. I think something came up at the last meeting for the finance committee, and we got pushed off until today. But we're happy to be here today to give you a very quick walkthrough of our audit of your financial statements. And in just a few minutes, I am going to share my screen and walk through a couple of documents, and hopefully give you a little bit of an overview of the audit process and the results of our audit. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at the financial statements because there's some key numbers in there. But I think for the most part, the committee probably is aware of the numbers. And I think it's the more important communication really is how the audit went. But just before I share my screen, and I know it was said earlier, I think by Athena, Nadzea and I are with Markham now. It was all the way back in January of 2023 that Melanson joined forces with a national firm, Markham. I probably said this at this similar meeting a year ago, even though we issued your June 22 statements as Melanson, but we had joined Markham. In essence, there are so few people going into public accounting right now that we really needed to avail ourselves of the resources of a bigger firm, of a national firm. We did this to maintain a presence in New England and particularly in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to continue to provide cities, towns, school districts with auditing services. Hopefully, even improve services with additional resources. We do think that over the next couple of years, we will be able to escalate the publication of many of the reports that have now been issued on the second half of the fiscal year. We think that they could be issued within 6 months. With that being said, I'm going to take just a second and share my screen. And what you should see here is you should see the on Markham letterhead dated March 26th. We refer to this in a very common or generic sense as our governance letter. What we really mean by that is our professional standards require that we communicate to those charged with governance, a committee like this, certain things about the audit process, and that's exactly what this letter does. I'm not going to walk through it in a tremendous amount of detail, but there are some key things in here to pay attention to. We're indicating we've audited your financial statements of the governmental activities, the business type activities. We're highlighting for you exactly what our responsibility is under all of the standards that we followed. We followed United States generally accepted auditing standards. We followed generally accepted government auditing standards. Oftentimes that's referred to as the yellow book. And we also followed OMB, or Office of Management and Budget, uniform guidance. That deals with the single audits. As a recipient of federal dollars, we are required to follow the uniform guidance as well. Towards the latter top of the next page, you see we discuss our planned scope and timing of the audit. It tells you that we did things on a test basis. We did not examine every single transaction that went through the books and records of Amherst, but we did things on a test basis. Also down here at the bottom of page 2, an important couple of bullet items. We identified the following significant risks of material misstatements as part of our audit planning. That should not concern anybody, because those two risks, management override of internal controls and the improper revenue recognition, as the bullet items say, they are presumed risk. So it doesn't matter if it's Amherst or the city of Lynn or the town of Lexington. These risks are identified in every single audit, and it's not even germane only to governmental entities. In any single audit of a for-profit, nonprofit, or governmental entity, these are presumed risks that we must identify in accordance with our professional standards, and accordingly, we must design audit steps to test to ensure that there is no management override of internal controls, and that there is no improper revenue recognition. So at the top of the next page, you see some significant audit matters, and then we list a number of things. These are what we very simply call estimates that are incorporated in your financial statements. I'm not going to highlight them or speak directly about them. The two that we'll talk about a fair amount when we get to the actual financial statements are your net pension liability and the related deferred outflows and deferred inflows of resources. Just know that those estimates are actuarially determined, and so they're based on not auditing standards, but actuarial standards that are employed in the conduct of those analyses. We talk about independence and how we must be independent of the town of Amherst to do what we do. A relatively new thing that's incorporated into this letter, required by professional standards, just quickly to talk about, is the fact that we did perform some non-audit services as a result of our contractual relationship with Amherst. Amherst, like virtually every governmental audit that we perform in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we assist the town in the actual preparation of the financial statements. So that involves taking the numbers in your books and records that are kept in the general ledger, which is, maintained in accordance with the Uniform Municipal Accounting System, which is promulgated by the Department of Revenue. We assist you in converting that to, in some cases, the modified accrual basis of accounting, as well as the accrual basis of accounting, in order to create your government-wide financial statements. We are required, again, by our professional standards to highlight that to you, that we do this as a non-audit service. And again, it's what we do for virtually every Massachusetts government that we are involved with. And it should not be thought of as a concerning step that we do. We talk about some uncorrected and misstatements attached to this letter, and I'm not going to walk through them in detail. Are some proposed audit adjustments we made. They are all consistent with what I indicated a minute ago, with the fact that the Department of Revenue, the Division of Local Services, requires that you keep your books and records under UMIS, or the Uniform Municipal Accounting System, which differs in many respects, or certainly in certain respects, from generally accepted accounting principles. So the entries that you see there are really just very much conversion entries from the basis of accounting that you are required to keep your books and records on to what we call the accrual basis, both the modified accrual basis and the accrual based financial statements. It's really a highlight of the what we call our governance letter. Again, the communication that's required by our professional standards to those charged with governance. Another document that I'm going to speak only very quickly about is what's up on my screen here. It's our reports pursuant to government auditing standards and uniform guidance. So there are essentially two reports in here. The first one by government auditing standards that requires us to communicate to those charged with governance if we identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in your internal control structure based on the audit that we performed. And I'm very happy to report that we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in accordance as defined on page 1 of this report. We did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies as a result of our audit work. The second report is, again, a uniform guidance. Again, those are the professional standards that we must follow as a recipient of federal dollars. In fiscal year 23, the program that we were required to test was your ARPA program. And so we were required to look at both the internal controls surrounding the ARPA program, as well as the compliance end of things, and were you doing with the money everything that you said you were going to do with the money, at least to date through the period of time of June 30, 2023. And similar to the government auditing standards one, our uniform guidance opinion on this is unmodified, meaning in our opinion, you complied with the requirements of uniform guidance as it relates to, I'm sorry, there were actually two programs in here. I should have looked down at my notes a minute ago. We were required to test the ARPA program as well as the Community Development Block Grant program in fiscal year 23. And so just to summarize again, in our report on uniform guidance indicated that there were no weaknesses in internal controls identified, and there were no instances of non-compliance with the federal requirements for the fiscal year ended 2023. That takes us over to really the basic financial statements. And then I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this document than I did the other two. But really, we're just going to hit the high points, and I'm going to scroll down to our opinion. I'm going to stop here and not necessarily scroll through the whole thing. But this is, for lack of a better way of saying it, this is what you pay us for with respect to our audit of your financial statements. Based on our audit work, and again, we performed our audit in accordance with the United States generally accepted auditing standards, as well as generally accepted government auditing standards. And based on our work in accordance with our professional standards, as you see here, our opinions, we've audited your financial statements. And the second paragraph, in our opinion, and again, I'm not going to read it. It's pretty boilerplate information. It comes right to us from our oversight organizations, the AICPA. In our opinion, your financial statements are materially fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in the United States of America. Clean opinion, technically it's called an unmodified opinion, or our opinion is without modification in that your financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Certainly nothing new there, but certainly also I look at that very much as a highlight of the audit. Following the opinion is what was known as MD&A, or management's discussion and analysis. It puts into text and in some cases some charts, some of the results of operation from fiscal year 2023. But I'm going to hop all the way over to the statement of net position. And I don't think I used this term earlier, but I probably have used it in the past, where in your basic financial statements, there are essentially two sets of financial statements, both a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective. Your statement of net position is a long-term perspective on the accrual basis of accounting. You see that, and I'm going to my focus here is going to be on the first column of numbers, the governmental activities, which is all your governmental funds, not your enterprise funds. And you can see it has all your capital assets included in here, and and you have your deferred outflows of resources related to pension and OPEB. I'll probably take questions on that should they arise. And you come over to the liabilities and net position segment of the statement, and you see really what the focus will be on this statement, which is your net pension liability and your net OPEB liability. I'm not going to walk into a lot of detail here, but in our opinion, any conversation about a local government's financial statements is not complete without at least a brief understanding of these two key accounts, the net pension liability and the net OPEB liability. OPEB, of course, is an acronym for other post-employment benefits. And by other, they mean other than pension. And that's a long-winded way of saying what it's really getting at is retiree health care. So a couple of things to point out with your net pension liability. That's measured as of 12/31/22, not as of 6/30/23, like everything else in this document. Certainly permissible. Retirement systems in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts have a calendar year end. So the measurement date goes back 6 months from your balance sheet date. And as of 6/30/23, again, with the measurement date of 12/31/2022, your governmental activities had a net pension liability of about $46.2 million. It's up about $16 million over the prior year. Very straightforward reason for that. In calendar year 2022, investment returns were not what plans in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts expected. So as investment earnings come in less than expected, the liability is going to go up. Very simple relationship there. I do want to point out that the discount rate that the county system uses is about 6.9%. That's consistent from the prior year to the year that's that we're auditing or speaking about right now. PERAC does like to see that less than 7%. Not that that's a requirement of PERAC, but I do know from conversations we've had with PERAC that they'd like to see that discount rate. Again, that's the expected future earnings of the plan, something less than 7%, and you're at 6.9%. On the net OPEB liability, again, that liability is measured as of your year end or 6/30/23. Your governmental activities had a liability of about $78.3 million. That's really quite consistent with the prior year. Last year was about $74 million. So it's increased a little bit. That's because there was a minor reduction in the discount rate. And again, as the discount rate goes down, the liability will increase a little bit. I could speak a lot more about the net pension and OPEB liabilities, as well as the related accounts called the deferred inflows of resources and outflows of resources. But when we get through going through the governmental funds and particularly the general fund, and I'll turn it back to the chair. And if there are any questions on pension issues or OPEB issues, I think I'll do my best to answer them at that point in time. But let's hop over to the balance sheet for your governmental funds. Most of the focus here is going to be on the general fund, the first column of numbers, and the focus will be down here in the fund balance section. But very quickly before we do, I want to point out two other major funds. The first one is your ARPA fund. ARPA, of course, being the federal grant. And I want to point out this liability called unearned revenue of about $8.6 million. Accounting standards do not permit the recognition of revenue until you actually do with the federal grant what it is you said you were going to do with it. So that's a fancy way of saying is when you spend the money, you will recognize the revenue. You got the cash up front, but you're not permitted to take it to revenue until you do with it what you are expected to do with it. So once you spend those dollars, this $8.6 million will move from a liability to revenue. Very simply, if you look at the entire balance sheet, you'll see that there's no fund balance. That's because revenues and expenditures will always match in this fund unless there are some interest earnings that are being kept here. So there is no fund balance. That's because all of the assets are offset by a liability. It's not a liability that you have to pay back. The only reason you would pay it back is if you didn't fulfill the time requirements of it. The money must be obligated by the end of this year. Then, if it has to be spent a few years after that, only then would this become a liability that you would have to pay back. But we're not very concerned about that at this point in time. The only other one I want to point out is the Capital Project Fund. This is new this year, and it's a major fund, and that's a term that's defined by the accounting standards. So you see a separate balance sheet, and if we were to flip over 2 pages, you would see a separate operating statement a statement of revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance. So that takes us all back to the general fund, where really the balance of this communication is going to reside. You see all your assets up here. You've got cash, you've got your receivables, you've got a prepaid item, accounts payable, accrued payroll, amounts that are due to other funds. You've got unavailable revenues, and then you have your total fund balance of $25.7 million, which is broken down into two components. The first component is your unassigned, meaning there are no constraints on those dollars, of $25.2 million. And that's really the starting point for calculating the town's certified free cash, is the unassigned fund balance. There will always be differences between unassigned fund balance and free cash, but that's really the starting point. And then you have your assigned fund balance of a little bit more than $500,000. That is essentially the encumbrances from your fiscal year 23 budget that are carried forward into fiscal year 24 and will be honored at that point in time. But the focus really is, for most readers at least, I don't want to say all, but I'll say super close to all readers, is looking at the unassigned fund balance. Again, $25.2 million. A year ago, that was about 26.9 million. So it's come down about $1.7 million, $1.8 million. And that I think is really to be expected. If you think back to the fiscal year 23 budget, you use several $1 million of your certified free cash towards to the operating budget and to your capital stabilization, capital budget, not capital stabilization. Please forgive me, I misspoke there. Towards the capital budget. So anytime you are using certified free cash, you are essentially expecting the outflows of resources to exceed the inflows of resources. Now, if we flip over 2 pages, what I'd call the statement of revenues and changes in fund balance, is really an important thing I want to point out here. And again, very much like the balance sheet, where the focus is on that third number up from the bottom, the unassigned balance. The focus here can also be on the third number up from the bottom. And you'll see that it's in parentheses, indicating that the outflows of resources exceeded the inflows of resources. There's some really nice disclosures in your footnotes that deal with this issue. I'm not going to walk through the disclosures, but I want to point this out for the community and the committee as a whole, is that a lot of focus should also exist on the difference between your revenues and expenditures. In other words, if we set transfers in and out aside for a minute, you see that you have inflows exceeding outflows of $7.5 million. And the only reason this really turns negative after transfers is because you transferred out almost $12.7 million. Almost all of that is coming over to your capital project fund. That's a highlight to me, and that should be pointed out to readers of the financial statements, that you are financing the acquisition of capital assets through a capital project fund. You're doing it with locally generated resources, that the $12.7 million that's coming over here at almost 12 million. There's a little bit more going on here, but for the most part, $12 million is coming out of the general fund, out of the budget, not from the issuance of debt, but from the budget, operating budget, the revenues that are generated. $12 million is leaving the general fund and coming over here and is being committed towards capital projects. It shows good strength in budgeting, that you can avoid going to the bond market by using locally generated dollars towards capital. I wanted to point that out because some readers will just look at the third number up from the bottom and see that it's in parentheses, and they could, I'm not saying they would, they could be concerned with that. So I wanted to highlight this so the community could refer to it and point back to what you did with the dollars. It's not as if they were used towards operation. Almost essentially $12 million of it was used towards capital. So, and I think that's very much a credit strength to Amherst right there. So that's really, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. There's really a wealth of other information in the financial statements. I talked about pension and OPEB very quickly. There's probably 15 pages of note disclosures that go into the various assumptions that generate those estimated liabilities and estimated deferred outflows and deferred inflows. There's also a fund balance footnote in there that talks a little bit more about your unassigned fund balance and the components of it. But I'll pause there and I'll certainly try to answer any questions that the committee may have, or if there's desire for me to go deeper into a subject matter, I will do my best to be able to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. And I'll just see whether hands go up, but I also want to make sure that Matt and Alicia, who have joined us, can hear us. So Matt, could you just let us know that you can hear us and we can hear you?
I'm present. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay, and Alicia?
I'm here, thank you.
Okay, that was a tour de force of going through going through actually quite clear. So I'm looking for any hands. And Bob Hegner, I'm not sure if you can raise your hand, so you can just shout out if you've got a question or a comment.
No, no comments, no questions.
Okay, I have one. I'm not seeing any other hands. It's sort of your insight. We're funding OPEB, and we're funding it, I won't say generously, but each year it's a pretty big draw on our fund. How do we compare with other communities in terms of what we're doing and our fund balance? Just in the middle, higher, lower? And I should have sent you that question in advance. I didn't. With the pension, I have a better sense of what we're doing with pension because we're on our way to being fully funded. We've been told, and OPEB is less so. So it's just a question.
I'm going to share my screen to answer the question because I think it's probably easiest. Because there's disclosure about your question in there. The answer to your question about how you're doing compared to your peers is not in here.
Okay.
This is one of the last pages in your financial statements. It's called what Nazaire and I refer to as RSI, or as the title indicates, required supplementary information. In terms of how well you're doing, what this schedule is telling you is that your total liability is 91 million. You have 12 million set aside, and your net liability is $79 million, or that you're 13% funded. I would need to look at 100 sets of financial statements to honestly answer you how you're doing compared to your peers. 13% without doing that analysis, I would say that's pretty good. I've seen that number be close to 70%, but I've also, more often than not, I see that number at about 5%. So without doing more homework, that's good. Now, there is one more thing I want to point out here that I made a mistake a couple of years ago by being asked the same question and not turning to this schedule to point it out. But I think it's required supplementary information, but I think this is what people really want to know. It's down here in the schedule of contributions. Now, your actuary has determined that the ADC, as we call it, the actuarially determined contribution, is about $5.8 million. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but I suspect that what that means is you need to put in $5.8 million a year for, say, 30 years. I don't have it on my fingertips to know if it's 20 years or 30 years, but instinctively, I'm going to say it's 30. What you're putting in is $4.2 million, almost $4.3 million. So your contribution deficiency is $1.5 million per year for probably for 30 years. I'll look it up later on, and if it's something other than 30 years, I'll let the folks in the administration know so they can relay this to the committee. But in my opinion, this is what people really want to know. The actuary says you got to put in 5.8 a year for 30 years. You're presently doing 4.3. You have a contribution deficiency of $1.5 million. That would be the delta, if you will, that if you were able to put in an additional $1.5 million per year for, in all likelihood, 30 years, then at the end of that 30-year period, you would become fully funded.
Thank you.
a long-winded way of saying it, but
No, no, that's helpful. And, one of the things I saw a couple years ago is we have a fairly generous retiree package when it comes to the Medicare side. We're paying a Part B premium in a way that, at least in the private sector, I'd rarely seen. So it's usually just the supplemental. So, and since I don't want to go into this, who follows Medicare, but anyway, Medicare's B premium has been going up. So it's in addition to the cost of the supplemental. So we had a few years where it was flatter, but so I'm looking to see whether there were any other questions or comments. Bernie,
Real quick, some congratulations are in order. Our thanks to the audit team, but our thanks to our finance staff and all for another remarkably good.
so Athena and Paul, what I'm not remembering, I probably should have had instructions, but do we need to recommend that we accept the report? Or do we basically just accept the report? So is there an action finance needs to take? The finance.
No, the council doesn't need to accept the report. The report, according to the charter, the report needs to be filed with the council. And then in the past, the council's referred it to finance committee, and then finance committee just reports on the discussion that happened at the committee, but there's no other council action that's required.
Okay. So I think not seeing any other comments. I actually thought, your reports have always been clear, but this was a very clear report to be able to follow. So, and the presentation was, so thank you very much.
thank you.
And I think that's it. So we can thank you and you can leave our meeting.
Thanks. Have a great, take care.
So now we're turning to the larger budget questions and a focus on the capital plan, but we postponed public comments. So I want to first see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to make a comment. And I see 2 hands are up. Athena, are you managing this or do you want me to?
I can do that. Andy has his hand up too, so I just wanted
Okay,
to check and see
Andy.
if he had a comment first.
Okay. Andy. You're muted.
And Andy,
the-
did you want to skip your question for now?
You,
No, it shouldn't be up.
Oh, okay.
your hand shouldn't be up. Okay. Okay, sorry. So that was the comment. All right, so Athena, we have one is a phone number and another one is a person. If you bring,
Yeah, I will. Do you want to do your spiel?
do I want to do my spiel? We're
The public comment
okay, I'll do my
spiel.
I'm not good at doing the spiel, but I will do it. We're limiting the public comments to 3 minutes, and we will not be responding and interacting with them, but they will be recorded. So with that said, we are open for public comments, and I see 2 hands are up.
Okay, the first one I'm going to take is a phone number ending in 0810.
You are the person 0810. You are with us if you unmute.
Yes,
You're,
I'm unmuted. I think I'm unmuted.
yes.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. We can hear you. So tell us who
Okay.
you are.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so I just have a couple of comments. One is about the school budget, and I would urge the finance committee to recommend a 6%, the 6% and also to consider strongly a gift of an amount that would enable the regional schools to go forward without cutting in staff that directly deals with students. So and that gift would not count toward Amherst's base for the next year. It would be a one-term gift. I think the town has given gift before. It doesn't count toward the base. And additionally, information, at least my understanding from the MMA website regarding the state Senate budget, is that the rural school aid that was cut by 50% by the House is fully funded at $15 million by the Senate. Who knows how that will go out, but if the Senate version prevails, the increase in per pupil assistance that was in the House budget is similar to the one in the identical to the one in the Senate budget. That will benefit the elementary schools by about 70 to 90 million. And it will, if the rural school aid is kept in, it will benefit the regional schools by about not 90 million, but 90,000, and a similar amount for the regional schools if rural aid prevails in the conference, which would then reduce the amount of any gift that were be given by the amount of the increased per pupil assistance. So those are good news from the Senate budget, and something I hope that the Finance Committee will consider. Finally, I think that with regard to both the regional budget and any consideration of the library project, I would encourage the committee to hear from the library trustees regarding the library project in person at a time that's convenient to the trustees. And because I watched what happened when the 4 town meetings occurred in person a few weeks ago, and I think that those meetings tend to produce better results and are more respectful of the fact that the body in question is elected, and I really think there should be a panel of the trustees that interact back and forth with the Finance Committee rather than giving them each 3 minutes to speak. And the same thing, I believe, should be the case for the Regional School Committee, that both whatever staff and elected representatives would speak for the Regional School Committee should be heard in person at a time that's convenient for the members. And I think that tends to produce not only better results, but it also tends to produce, I think, better informed results, because there are just too many moving parts for someone who's not directly involved on a basis to understand. And I think it's good to have an interactive process rather than your 3 minutes and then you have to listen to us talk for however long. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just for the record, that was Vince O'Connor. He may have introduced himself at the beginning.
Next is Tony Cunningham.
District 1. On the general budget, I want to encourage a recommendation to support the 6% budget for the regional schools. As a parent of a current 8th grader and an upcoming rising 6th grader, I think the cuts that are being proposed will really, really devastate the quality of the education that the kids are getting. As far as the capital budget goes, the financial management policy states that 10% of the property tax levy should go to capital, but you're proposing 10.5%. So I would say that's not in compliance with the town's own policies and should be scaled back. I added up the numbers in this capital budget that are for the Jones Library expansion project, and it's over $1.3 million. When you combine the borrowing for the town, the small amount on a ban, and the CPA contribution. And so I'm hoping that project can be ended and that money can be freed up for other things. I compared FY24's projections for this year with the FY25 capital budget, and there's a lot of differences, which makes me question how the planning is done. There's a lot of things in this year's capital budget that weren't even on the list last year, let alone on the list for FY25. A lot of numbers have gone up significantly, and there's a few new amounts that are really pricey that weren't in last year's budget at all. For example, the 900,000 this year and $1 million next year for the public safety radio system replacement, and $500,000 for roof replacements, which doesn't specify which buildings it's for. So there's a number of things that I would question with this year's capital budget. The planning department, there's a number of amounts for studies. When I went back and watched one of the meetings, they talked about a third parking study, which I think is not a good use of limited funds. We already have 2 parking studies. I would propose a moratorium on studies until we work with the ones that we already have. And then there's unspent capital. You don't have the updated list of unspent capital. I would really love to see not just 3 years old, but even newer than that, because I think there's a lot of things that have been approved in the past that haven't been spent. And I think we should be using that up before we allocate new funding, especially if it's more than 3 years old. And I think that's, and roads and sidewalks. Very disappointing to see that the contribution to roads and sidewalks being halved this year. So I think if the Jones project can end, we can up the roads and sidewalks investments again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so I'm closing the public comment period. Sorry, that was my timer going off. So I think we're now turning to both the overall budget and then a focus on the capital budget. So everyone here of the with the exception of Bernie and Matt Holloway, were part of the presentation that we had last night from Sandy and Jennifer, the team. So I'm not sure how best to move forward. I know Mandy had taken on herself to focus on the capital plan and with questions. I was chair of the JCPC and I also have questions. Bob was on that, including future years. So do we want to start with the general budget? Any comments, questions on it? I'm looking at the screen on faces. Do we want to have a quick repeat of last night or jump in? I'm open to any suggestions.
I think we should just move on. I can also just go back and watch the tape.
And Kathy, Kathy, I did sit in on a lot of the meeting yesterday, so I feel pretty confident.
Okay, so the suggestion, what we came up with when we were planning the meetings, we thought we would focus on at least one piece. So it's the capital improvement plan, both the coming year FY25 and then the 5-year look in what was provided to us. And one thing for anyone who's in the audience, also for the members here, there were some errors in the original wording of specific projects that some lists were kept from the year before that not deleted. So paying attention to the list of projects that's in the Excel spreadsheet is the FY25 list. And one of the innovations in the past was what Tony just referred to. And we at JCPC did not look at that. It wasn't available, but it was the updated list of capital projects approved in earlier years where there was a balance that wasn't yet spent. And that has not yet been updated. That is the same list we saw last year. But in the past, one of the things by looking at that, it turned out some of them could be closed out and we could move the money into the current year capital budget. So that's a piece that I just wanted to note. So Mandy, I know you had prepared questions, so I don't know whether if you want to start out and then I will see which things you've already raised, and then I will, I have some as well.
Yeah, I can. I sent my questions over to Athena and Bob on Friday, so hopefully, Paul and that they got forwarded to Paul for some potential things, but I'll go through some of the things I looked at. As I've been thinking about budgets, I pulled out questions about whether the capital plan meets the council financial guidelines and things about the goals, right? And so when I went through it, I did some sort of checking of some financial guidelines and said, does it meet X guideline or Y guideline? And our financial guidelines included that capital be 10.5% of the levy this year, and it does meet that 10.5% from our financial guidelines that we approved in December of last year. That it be progress on the climate goals within our capital budget for buildings and vehicles. And I saw that many of the vehicles being proposed for purchasing are hybrids or electrics or have electric engine block things and things like that for making progress on those goals. Some other things that I thought were met with the capital plan, explicit recognition of instances where budget allocations reflect the manager goals, particularly with climate action goals. And a plan for repairing and maintenance of our current buildings, including new ones with inventories of needs so that they continue to serve the community for many years. That includes the maintenance facilities fund that I think is expanding in size over the course of the budgets. I'm happy to, I don't know whether Paul or any of our finance team want to just answer some of the questions I asked, or I can go through them. I don't know how the finance team wants to deal with that as we move forward. I'm happy to ask them out and see what the answers are, or they could just speak to them if they want.
Yeah, so we just reviewed them recently. Mandy just, Sandy was here yesterday afternoon. So we may have answers. So we can go through them, and some of them we can provide you written responses to when we have a little bit more time.
Okay. Do you want to just do that, or do you want me to ask them specifically and then?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to go from the top of the document down. But Kathy?
The rest of us don't have a copy of it. Bob did, so if you do it, it would be helpful. And then we'll put them in the packet so that we have a record of what was asked. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I'll start from the top of the list. I bolded the questions on the document you got, but the first one went to a financial guideline of seeking additional grant funds to capitalize on opportunities to recoup some sustainability investment. So I asked questions about some of the future replacements of if there were plans for certain projects that were listed in future years to apply for sustainability grants. And I specifically identified the Crocker window replacement, the EV infrastructure and vehicles, and the general sustainability projects as whether there were active plans to apply for grant funding.
We'd have to, I don't have we'd have to get our sustainability director and facilities to talk about specifics like at that level. What the goal of this budget was to put funds away so that when those opportunities presented themselves, we were able to actually, and they required a match, we were able to act on them pretty quickly.
So one of the things, Mandy, during the meeting on Crocker.
Sorry, hang on, Kathy. Sandy had a comment and it was muted.
Sandy, go ahead. I didn't see your hand.
In the current year budget, when we know that there's a grant available, we mark that in the plan. For the out years, we usually just identify what we anticipate the cost of it will be. And then as we get closer to actually funding it, we then start to look at what grants might be available. So I think, as Paul was indicating, Stephanie is always looking at grant opportunities, and when they become more real, we then identify them.
And I was just gonna supplement that on Crocker. We all flag Crocker. The JCPC focused mainly on FY25, but looking at Crocker, what we had, my sense was these were placeholders because there's the hope that the accelerated repair program opens up and that the Crocker request could then be, the early money would help us figure out what the request is, and then we could go in because it's a series of pieces, including the HVAC system and the roof. And so those, at least my sense is they are placeholders because we don't actually have a good sense of what the number is, but we also, there may be an opportunity depending on what the accelerated repair program looks like and when it, and it's whether we get in the queue for it or not. So that was one of the things that came out when we asked about looking forward on Crocker.
So my next question's related to sort of a similar financial guideline, which was strong consideration for funding town municipal needs from CPA and CDBG funds. And again, looking in future years, there seem to be future projects that could apply for CPA or CDBG grants. And I was curious whether the intent is, but are these just placeholders again? And the ones I looked at were Crocker's Playground, the accessible playground, Puffer's Ponds, restroom and beach and trail improvements, the general trail improvements, the Civil War tablet display, and the War Memorial and Mill River playgrounds.
So I think that we have submitted some of those. Most of the projects that went to CPA were town sponsored projects to begin with this year. I know Holly, were you involved in the CPA process? And did we have others that didn't make the list? We tried to match what our requests were to what the funding was available.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I was involved in the CPA process this year, and I think that every year there are several projects that come to CPA. Timing is sometimes a factor, but I think that they always try to look, especially for playgrounds, they are always trying to look towards CPA as well. But I think the intent is to keep them on the capital plan as well, so that if they don't get funded, they are still there as placeholders. Yes.
So I think the answer is that yes, if it's something that's eligible for CPA, we take it there. But this is a way to sort of chronicle what is on the list of sort of our to-do list.
And I will say in the discussions of those, Mandy, actually every single one that you just listed, some of it, there may be some state park grant money as well. So it was listed as, this is a rough estimate of what we think it'll cost. And the Puffer's Pond Dam is an example of, we need to do a certain amount of things that there's probably money to match that money, but we have to do something first. So those out year projects were described as potentially eligible for CPA and or state, which helps in the out years. It doesn't help FY26 per se.
Yep. So continuing with financial guidelines items, one of our guidelines was to explore possible opportunities to share equipment and facilities with neighboring communities. The field maintenance equipment, I believe, is on year 2 of 2 in terms of buying new field maintenance equipment. Did you explore cost sharing for the purchase of that with the region or any nonprofit sports leagues? And a similar guideline was in terms of when you purchase things, the related costs for ongoing operating. So for field maintenance equipment, I know this was a big question last year in JCPC. Will it require the use of more DPW staffing, particularly when the statement relating to the reason to buy it is to, quote, maintain athletic fields to a level that has most recently been discussed, end quote, but may not actually be done right now? And what type of costs on an ongoing basis will those require, and are they built into budgets, or have we looked at cost sharing those additional ongoing operating costs for field maintenance when we buy the maintenance equipment with other entities, including the region or any nonprofit sports leagues that will be using those fields? I know it's complicated. You might not
Yeah.
have an answer
So
right
we
now.
don't have a coherent answer on that right this moment. I think that's something we would talk with DPW about, but it's also something we're trying to respond to the need for higher level maintenance. You know, since if we're not going to have a turf field, we know that the level of maintenance for the current fields has to be increased. And I think we talked about this at the time. We talked about the need for investments in our fields, and that this is part of the response to that. It's very complicated in terms of maintenance of fields. You know, it's always been a bone of contention because we have multiple people who are responsible. We have DPW, we have recreation, and we have schools, all taking care of different parts of the actual same field, which is kind of crazy. Um, so DPW takes most of the ownership of the major fields and the major stuff, but they don't do the sidelines, for instance, and things like that. So yeah, sharing information is sharing the get into cost sharing with the district on a piece of equipment becomes more complicated. Although I have had a conversation fairly recently, a couple weeks ago, with Hadley about some of the things, some of the equipment that they're looking to buy that might be beneficial to us, or we might want to share. Most of the time, those things are they're pieces of equipment that we all want to use at the exact same time, say. But it's open to that conversation, and also with Sunderland. I've had those conversations.
That's great to hear, because it kind of goes to a question. I didn't open that up to other towns, but vehicle purchases, I noticed a lot of our vehicles are weekly uses for same departments or different departments, but they're the same type vehicle. Have we ever explored sort of sharing amongst the departments of vehicles if they're literally used on a weekly basis of once a week in each department, to make sure that they could be used on different days so we don't have to maintain and own and purchase as many vehicles? Is that something we're actively exploring?
So I guess we'd have to know which vehicles we're talking about. I don't have the list in front of me, but I mean, certainly we could address that. Yeah.
I think it's something to think about going forward, because we do have an insane number of vehicles.
I would say we do have done that to some extent. Like when we bought, when I was here years ago, we bought the electric vehicle for the IT department. That was available for other departments in town hall to use. So there are small examples like that. That's one that just happens to come to mind now. There are other larger pieces of equipment that I know that DPW and conservation sometimes share. But then, frankly, the scheduling and timing of use of equipment sometimes makes it hard to share. So yes, we have done it some, and I think we do continue to think about it. But I would not suggest that that is going to make a big change in the amount of equipment that we have, because sharing gets to be complicated.
I think the budget itself probably answers this one, but our guidelines said to provide a strategy, that you should provide a strategy to meet high priority needs and that views capital investments with a climate lens. And so I just wanted to ask you to talk about the strategy that you took in viewing these capital investments in this plan with the climate lens, beyond hybrid vehicle purchases or anything like that, as we move forward.
So, I think putting together, we always look at all those at the climate lens on everything now. It really has been integrated into our thought process. With any kind of building changes that are being made, especially HVAC, Stephanie and Jeremiah, they used to office right next to each other, but now they're in very tight communication with each other in terms of what's on the radar, what has to be done, what's where is funding available to do things. So I think that and I mean, the beauty of this is our facilities director is 100% bought in on moving us towards our climate goals. So I think that's just, I don't know if there's a checkbox or anything like that, but they definitely are there with it. Yeah, Sandy.
Could I just give you two specific examples? So one is the chiller for the police department. That is going to be a heat pump chiller. Originally, I don't think they were thinking about that, but as Jeremiah moved forward with the project, one of the things he pitched to us for the need for more money, not only because the original estimate was too low, but just to invest with a heat pump system so it would be more green. Second, in regard to the roof replacement program, both he and Stephanie have talked a lot about not only repairing roofs so they don't leak, but looking at re-insulating or making sure the insulation goes into those roof replacements when we do them. So you have to take these things on a case-by-case, site-by-site basis. But I know in the discussions leading up to this capital plan that those two specifically were talked about, so you can cite to people in the public for how their money is being spent.
Thank you. I'm getting into a little more broader questions now as we go through some of the guidelines. One of our financial guidelines was to be explicit when making trade-offs where goals conflict with available resources and setting clear priorities. And in reading the CIP, I didn't really see necessarily any particular statements of any trade-offs you needed to make in terms of funding any particular projects with respect to the goals because there wasn't enough funding and things like that. So were there any trade-offs you needed to make regarding capital projects as they related to the council goals or anything? I know it's a vague and general question, but it's part of our financial guidelines is to be explicit as to what trade-offs you're making. And so I'm curious what those were. And related to that was we all know that the road funding out of cash capital decreased this year compared to other years. What is the result of reducing that funding? And I know this question is probably for a later conversation at Town Services and Outreach, but what's the ultimate goal on road repairs? We have a pavement condition index map. What band or rating on that map are we aiming for our roads? When you say 40 million or 50 million to accomplish all road repairs, is that to get everything up to a 100 and excellent? Or is that just starting with the ones that are below X number and repairing them up to a certain pavement condition index? All of that is trade-offs, but I guess that's my question is talk about the trade-offs you made.
You've asked a lot of questions. I think Paul, Kathy, and I could each answer some of that. I'm going to start just because I'm a big mouth. I would say there were way more capital requests and plans for spending than we could afford. So going through that process, we had continually to engage in trade-offs and, where are we going to put money? What are we going to prioritize? So I'll give you one specific example. We have $250,000 in there for sustainability projects, and Stephanie had originally asked that to increase, basically by just in large picture, $100,000 a year each year for the next few years. And we said, well, we can't guarantee that. I mean, we don't have enough money to do that, but we will put 250 in each year going forward. So I think that was sort of a trade-off between money and yet the commitment that the council had and that the manager has to sustainability. God, you asked so many things. I've forgotten all the questions, Mandy Jo.
The big one was about trade-offs and which ones you made, and so that answered a portion of that, but that you did discuss it in JPPC. And the other one was about specifically the reduction of road funding. And
so this year when we had extra money, our kind of default dump in account was sidewalks. So sidewalks and roads kind of go hand in hand. In the previous years, we've put the town has put extra money into roads. This year, the default was to put into sidewalks because frankly, we get inundated, I'm sure you do too, with requests for both roads and sidewalks. So there was a little bit of a trade-off there. You know, could we have put it in roads just as easily? Yes. Do they go hand in hand? Yes. I do think at some point, I know there's going to be discussion about the Jones and what happens with that if we don't go forward or we go forward in some other plan. And then should we dump more money into roads or sidewalks in this plan? Again, because none of that's decided, we're not proposing anything at this time. But I do think those are the kind of things that we're going to have to think about. So.
No.
Oh, and on the PCI index, I would just say, generally you want to be, I don't know, at 80%. If you're at 100%, I mean, every road is brand spanking new. And there are curves you can look at for how much annual spending you have to engage in any particular year once your PCI or road index goes below a certain number, and therefore the level of repairs you have to make to a road are much broader and more complete than if you can simply patch them and do an overlay or something like that. So if you're basically in the low 80s, you can do those kind of overlays and then keep things in reasonable shape. And that is generally where you want to be. I don't happen to know what the annual dollar amount is that Amherst needs to spend to be in that area. You know, I've talked to Guilford about it a little bit. I think it's a conversation to have with him in the future. But I do think that's also why every year we've dumped more money into roads, because just the baseline that's there isn't going to be enough over the long run to keep us at that level. So those are kind of general answers.
Thank you. I then looked at the budget as it relates to our goals, the performance goals that on that big Excel sheet there were, and there's a whole bunch that don't necessarily relate to the CIP. But I'll just go through. There were a bunch that I thought that the CIP met, 7 or so of them using a climate lens, reviewing and revising regulations to reduce barriers to operating businesses, and proposing a whole bunch of revisions and measures to bylaws for housing, for economic development, and all of that, because it had the funding for planning and conservation and planning for studies in them, that I felt that that funding was going to trying to help meet the manager's performance goals on those grounds. But there were some performance goals that I wasn't sure that I thought could relate to the CIP versus other parts of the budget or just operations in general, that I didn't notice or couldn't find a real clear use of or addressing in the CIP. And those were using a racial and social justice lens when making decisions, and beginning to identify and propose revisions to policies, bylaws, and regulations to dismantle structural racism. And so I'd like you to comment on how those goals were incorporated into the CIP, and if they weren't, how they plan to be addressed in other ways.
So I think I report every month on my goals on the 7 top things that have been identified by CSWG, which includes the Resident Oversight Board, which is being funded primarily through ARPA funds. And so that would not be reflected in this. Maintaining the, CREST department and building that into our budget, which I think we continue to build and have the conversations, and the same with the DEI department. You know, the outreach work, we've been putting additional money in for outreach work from the DEI department. So they have a little bit of a budget to work with when they're putting events together. So those are the actual manifestation of the investments, right? So in terms of, I think, we say that, we try to incorporate sort of the climate lens and the racial equity lens when we look at things, as we start to make, but most of, I have not been able to really internalize really in a strong way, like choosing roads to be paved. Is there a racial equity lens to place on that? And I know intellectually, I think there is, but I have not seen a good model of how that's been done in other communities, quite honestly.
So I have 3 more questions, 2 of which are probably fairly easy.
Mandy,
but Kathy can go first.
I just want to do a comment on this because I think multi-use paths, sidewalks potentially fit all. And I know, even though I didn't think it was a good idea, you grabbed a very big share of the community development block grant to widen a sidewalk. And the designation was, it's mainly a student area, but it qualifies as a low income area. So, thinking about where we do sidewalks should also, it's not
Yep.
just roads, but where we do sidewalks. So it's never been clear to me, Mandy, you asked about sort of the priorities in doing this, but
Yep.
if we bring in a new duplex development that has the quality to live there, you have to be low income, to a property that has no sidewalk at all and has no pullout. Do we think in advance, including, is there state money that would say, okay, because of where this is happening, there might be state road money? I'm just not sure how that thinking happens within the staff because
Well,
it's
yeah, so
yeah.
if I may, Kathy, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because East Hadley Road is a perfect example where it's repaved, a new multi-use path, and also a new path all the way to Groff Park, creating a better walkway to Groff Park, so it'd be easy access. Hickory Ridge has the entire sort of motivation for that was to open up that space for access to the large apartment complexes on East Hadley Road, and to build actual pathways, which we're working on, from East Hadley Road to the Hickory Ridge area, which is going to be spectacular. And just if you haven't gone up there, now's the time to go up, because the pathways are really getting built in a really interesting way. But we envision that as also opening up West Pomeroy Village area in the shops there to make it more accessible. One of the challenges for the East Hadley Road folks is a food desert. It's really hard for them to get any place, and having it be getting the little stores in Pomeroy Village accessible to them, where they don't have to go out onto West Street and then go, is one way. And then also, talking with the PVTA about better access to the malls in Hadley is another big challenge for us.
Thank you. 3 more questions, 2 of which are fairly easy. In past years, I hope, in past years, the CIP has had a list of projects that aren't fundable within 5 years, but are on the radar. That seemed to disappear from the CIP plan. And so just if we could get that back in the plan or a supplement to the CIP of things that dropped off, I can't even, I think the dam was on it at one point at Puffer's Pond, which now is sort of in debt schedules and stuff in other places. But just keeping that list of things that are on our radar, but we haven't figured out how yet to get it in, I think is really important. Secondly,
can I just say,
sure.
That was just a matter of staff time. I mean, I was doing the budget and the capital with 10 to 15 hours a week. And I frankly just said, all right, I'm not doing that. I just don't have time. So next year, when you have a new finance director, I'm sure it'll be back.
As long as we don't lose track of it. The second one is on the debt schedule. The Crocker Farm roof seemed to be on it twice, both at 3.6 million. If you look at page 30, 3.6 million borrowings on the debt schedule labeled Crocker Farm roof or Crocker Farm roof replacement. And there's not just, is that a duplicate? One of the questions is that a duplicate, or is there some thought of that the Crocker Farm roof needs 2 phases? But the 5-year plan on page 9 has the Crocker Farm roof once, but at 2.6 million, not 3.6 million. And so the other question I have is, what number is the most accurate, since we've got a couple of discrepancies here? What numbers are we looking at?
I'll have to look at the duplication issue. I don't know what's going on there. On the Crocker Farm, I think what I did is I just combined two different projects because there was a roof and some HVAC stuff all happening the same year. And just for ease of calculating what the future debt cost might be, I think I just added those two together and put them all under one thing. I mean,
So that
I
would
do
explain the
remember doing that.
2.6
So
to 3.6
Yeah.
difference then. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the final question I asked last night, that maybe you probably still don't have answers to, but it relates to the library borrowing payments that are listed in the FY25 section for the repayments of borrowing at 1.2 million. If the project as the borrowing has been authorized doesn't continue, at some point we're going to need a plan for that money, both not just in FY25, but in future years. Whether it's what to do with what's already that 1.2 million that's in the FY25 budget. If you've got thoughts as to what might happen, I know it's really there, but related to that, are you going to be potentially asking for additional debt borrowing for a library repair? Would that debt borrowing start in FY25 such that the 1.2 million might need to stay in there for library borrowing? Or would that library repair debt borrowing, again, this is all speculation, right? Would that be beginning in FY26 and beyond? Any thoughts you've got right now to how we might be dealing with that in the process, given the CIP plan and our deadlines for voting it, would be helpful, I believe.
As they taught me in law school, the answer is it depends. So I think if we don't go forward, so no decisions have been made yet on the library. It's still under review. So that's second. If we do not go forward with the current library plan, it could be that we have a modification for that somewhere down the road. It could be that even if we don't go with the current plan at all, there's still significant amount of work that needs to be done on that building. And at some point, we would have to incur the costs for doing that. Whether that would be something that would have to be paid for in FY25 or not, we don't know yet because a whole new plan would have to be. If there are no costs in FY25 related to the library, I would strongly recommend that you keep the money in capital and either put money toward things like roads and sidewalks, which would be a possibility, or there are a number of borrowings that we would plan to do next spring. And what you could do is reduce the total amount of those borrowings by that 1.3 million and borrow 1.3 million less and just pay cash for some of those. In other words, reducing the amount you have to borrow for future borrowings with the money we have in the budget now. We do that sometimes when we do bands and we roll over just a portion of the previous year bands and pay cash. Or if you just have cash on hand for a capital project, it's a combination of cash and borrowing. If the cash portion goes up, the borrowing portion can go down. So there are things we've been discussing without having made any decisions. But I guess my strong recommendation is whatever is done, it stay within capital so that the town continues to invest in its capital resources.
Thanks. That was the extent of my questions on capital.
Then I have some, but I'm going to wait and see if anyone else has some. Bernie,
This is Bob. I don't have any questions, but I want to make a couple of comments.
Okay, so
That's it.
Bernie's,
ahead.
Bernie's
Yep.
hand is up. So Bob, why don't we do you, Bob, and then Bernie?
Okay, so I just wanted to let everyone know that when the first pass through for JCPC, the ask for financial investments or capital investments was what, about 5 million above what we had budget for. So we had to reduce that, and Sandy worked very hard, very diligently with department heads to hone these requests, budget requests. In many cases, they came back lower. In one specific request, we had purchase of a new greens mower for the golf course that we then it got changed to a used mower, and so there were a lot of trade-offs that were done, both between in the minds of the people who were asking for the money, as well as amongst the members of JCPC. So I think there was a long conversation we had about each of these spending asks, and I think we arrived at a pretty good place. For example, there was a discussion of the police cruisers, whether they could be electric. And it turned out that the police said, gee, we'd like it, but it doesn't really work for us for a lot of reasons. Some of it is the design of the police cruiser. There's really only one manufacturer in the country that builds police cruisers, and they can do a hybrid, but they can't do electric. And the way that they're used, electric wouldn't work. On the other hand, the parking department, their vehicle was rear-ended and needed to be replaced. So they very quickly said, well, electric would be fine for that because it stays in town for 99% of its time. So we really looked at pretty hard at these things. And I think we came up with a pretty good plan. The other thing I wanted to mention too is the improvements on Belchertown Road are going to make it much safer for children, many of whom will be in the affordable housing, or the children that are now in the current apartment buildings. It'll make it much safer for them to go to school and for adults across Belchertown Road. So I think that's certainly a case where we have, whether intentional or not, I think there's a great benefit for the social justice. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Bernie.
Yeah, a couple of comments and a couple of questions. I'm going to have a tough time following Mandy Jo on this because she's very thorough as usual. But the cost of police vehicles has really jumped from last year. I know we typical cop car, you want to get rid of it at 100,000 miles. And I also know that these they aren't on a lot somewhere where you can just go pick one up. It takes a while to get one. So just like is that increase in police vehicles, is that being purely driven by production costs, by what Ford's willing to sell us cars for?
Yeah, the police chief did report back to us based on his looking at costs. When we actually buy them, we will spend what it costs. In other words, if it costs less than 90,000 per vehicle, we will spend whatever the lower amount is. But for budgeting purpose, he thought it was wise to put in that amount based on his conversations with Ford.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and the thought about EV police cars are designed for a variety of purposes that we don't think about, like how do you get somebody who's not wanting to get into the back seat. I didn't see in just shifting gears. Well, the other comment is about sharing equipment. Sharing equipment, in my experience, is always a nice thought, but never works out. I can understand why people would want to see it, but apart from some informal sharing that might go on between highway superintendents, and I'm not saying it happens here, I've seen it in other towns, a formal kind of sharing agreement typically tends not to be very practical because everybody needs the same stuff at the same time. Looking at the public works budget, I didn't see any narrative on the allocation for waste processing and the allocation for stormwater management. And I'm curious as to what those purposes are. I also saw nothing about water. If we want to look at a climate lens, we need to look very hard at stormwater management. Every culvert is a potential disaster. So I'm wondering what's behind those two requests.
Bernie, just to confirm, this is in the capital that you're looking at, and could you just
Yeah,
remind me
Public Works, capital, facility, waste processing, 40,000. I'm not sure what that's for. And then Public Works, grounds, stormwater management, $100,000. So stormwater management can be a lot of different things. I'm glad to see it's there, but given the weather patterns and how, the number of culverts we have, the number of stream crossings we have, streams by roads, that can be very troublesome in the future. I mean, you can't answer it now. I'll either, pester Guilford about it when I do the review of the highway budget, or folks can get back to me another time.
Well, Sandy's looking for it when Guilford presented it to us, when to comply with the regs we put in place that were required by the state. There's a series of things they need to do. So this was regulation driven on the 100,000, Bernie, but he did not go into detail on exactly what pieces that means. So I think it's a great question, because one of the things I've noticed is the number of drains along the roads that are completely clogged so that the water cannot run into the designated area.
Well, there's a couple of different things here. I mean, my focus was on everyday roads. Yep. There's also EPA requirements, which were set aside during the previous administration, that has now come back into force, about managing wastewater from our runoff from our streets and how that gets treated. So it's likely that Guilford is looking at the EPA requirements that will force us to make sure that we've created storm drains and the storm drainage system that takes care of surface pollutants and may even require treatment.
That's known as the MS4 permit from the EPA. And I know he did talk about the need to do various engineering studies in order to make sure that we are compliant with some of those things. And I believe that's what that money was for.
Okay, well, that's good. But that then opens up the question, my other question, which is, managing stormwater in other parts of the town, and have we looked at every culvert in town and determined whether or not it's adequate given what we're seeing in flows. And in terms of waste processing, I know we've had some fatberg problems. I know we've had a couple of sewer backups. I didn't know if that was addressed towards offsetting that, or what that money was for. So I'll take that up with Guilford when I do the highway department review. The other thing I want to that comes to mind in terms of groundwater and storm management is the aptly named Fearing Brook, which I know we have some studies done on, which is likely polluting the Fort River. But that's Amherst partially underground river, which we're going to have to take a look at some point. So, okay, thanks.
So, although I was on the JCPC committee, and Sandy and staff did yeoman's work on trying to get us all the pieces together, one of the things that we didn't do was what you started to do, Mandy, is focus on the years beyond 25, on some of the items that are in it. So I do think we need to, especially since we're looking at a deficit going forward, that it's not clear to me that we need to be placing police vehicles on the same schedule that we have in the past. And I know we missed a few years. So one of the questions is on hybrids, they may run longer. So as we get more experience, they've gotten better. They are, as Bernie pointed out, they're expensive. So, and so just trying to think through what that schedule is, as opposed to the ask for it. So we skipped them on a year. Looking forward, DPW this year had no vehicles on the list. It had one, a sidewalk plow that for $250,000. Mandy may remember it from last year. Last year we said no, and this year we said no again. So it's right now not on the list, but I did note that some of the things that are on this year's list were not on last year's list, big ticket items. So I don't know how much, Paul, that kind of advanced planning that some of the, not 8 years out or 5 years out, but at least 2 years out, we have a better sense, this radio equipment, that we needed a new base station, we needed new things to be able to talk on VHF and UHF. That wasn't on the list last year, and apparently it was in the works. I mean, they were a lot of work going on. It's fire, it's emergency more generally, but it was such a big ticket item. It was startling to see it for the first time as opposed to what's coming to us. So that was one comment on a looking forward, not just for this year. The other is on when we're looking at this year, that if staff can update the table of past things we've awarded, that there's about $500,000 in schools in that table, and that was current as of a year ago. It wasn't updated. So what we did last year with JCPC, by exploring it, we still had Sonia and Sean, but we got people to say, we're actually not going to use that money. We're only going to need half of it, and we could grab that all. So I'm looking for ways of enhancing the road budget. We put to balance the budget, Mandy, this year, sidewalks was in for just 50, and we came up with another 150 to bring it up to 190. That was somewhat, do we do it in sidewalks or roads? It's no matter what, it's not very much money. So I'm just thinking that we should be looking at that. The last comment is more on what this incredible document doesn't show you. We've mentioned a lot of things that are being funded by grants that are capital. So Bob just brought up the Belchertown Road improvements. Paul, you talked about the multi-purpose road and stuff. Maybe there's a way of, that's not drawing on our cash capital or borrowing, but it's grants that were brought in to explicitly do a piece of work that would have otherwise either not gotten done at all or would have been done with town money. So maybe there is a narrative for that. And then I just happen to know the CDBG piece has this sidewalk piece in it. And it's like $450,000, $500,000. It wasn't a small amount of money, but just trying, CPA does some pieces and we at least get a report on that. There might be a way of capturing it, is all I'm asking for, to show that it's not just this budget, but there's another set of money that's coming in. So those are my comments, particularly the out years. I think when we raised questions about them, some of them they were placeholders. We don't really know how much work will have to go into War Memorial. I noticed that the Crocker Farm Playground is more expensive, the whole placeholder, than what we're paying for the Fort River accessible playground. So we're going to have a real world example of one of them that we're putting in, if assuming the estimates come out okay. So just trying to at least do a 2-year horizon of what's really coming at us would be useful. Those are my comments, and I don't know what to do about roads, because we really need the state, this chapter 90 being frozen, and then we get another 100,000 or 200,000, but we don't get a big kick up. And meanwhile, We have a large state facility with a lot of cars and trucks and delivery vans that's driving on our roads. So our roads deteriorate fast because of the number of vehicles running on them. So those are sort of observations rather than go up back and redo something.
So if I just want to comment on a couple of those things, Kathy. So we typically have always prioritized emergency equipment in terms of the town, in terms of capital investment. And I think we were a little caught off guard in terms of the speed with which the radio equipment came forward. Because I think what happens is sometimes people start digging into it and then they realize what the actual numbers are. The 2-year out planning, I want to just recognize that we were pulling this budget together in the capital improvement program with 10 hours of Sandy for about
No,
5
yeah.
months and Jen and Holly pulling things together. So recognizing that if we had a full-time person in this position like we had last year with a consultant, that was Sonia last year, we will do a lot better once that position is filled. So I just ask you for some little leeway on that in terms of what we can provide to you now, and Sandy's hours are going to be taken up by this meeting. You're asking him to be at 4 to 5 hours of meeting a week, and that's half the time he's given to us. So we want to make these meetings productive. The intervening time is going to be a challenge for us. The past capital, usually what happens, and Holly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, at the end of the fiscal year, she goes through everything. And then that's when we close out accounts. It's like everybody has to come in and justify if you're allowed to keep an account open or not. And when those things come up, it usually comes back to the council in the fall. We say, here's some closeout capital, or whatever it is that we have, or free cash or whatever. And then you usually do some actions in the fall, and that's where we put more money into roads oftentimes. And the grant funded stuff, whenever you're right, we do a lot. We get a lot done. Many of these projects, the North Common, Belchertown Roads, Kellogg Avenue, all done by special grants that we've received. We try to announce that, but we don't collect the information in one space. And I think that would, someone with time could really pull that together. And I think you'd be really impressed by that. And then just the other thing I think is the police cruisers. I think that's something we should look at. What is with hybrid vehicles, what is the best practice for replacing vehicles? We look at this as being something that these are vehicles that have to respond in an emergency. The employees spend 8 hours or 24 hours a day in these vehicles. We want them to be, I believe very firmly that office workers should have really good chairs, and people should have the right tools and really good tools to do their job on the essential pieces of their job. So I think you're raising all great points that we will keep moving on.
Yeah, and I see Andy's hand is up, and I didn't want to. Working with Sandy and the staff was pure joy, and we realized how much they were scrambling, but they scrambled in a way that was so responsive.
Sandy left the picture, so
Yeah,
he's not hearing good thing.
So we had nothing but praise, realizing it was like coming in in the middle of a process, catching up to get everything in place. So what Sandy and his team did was pretty remarkable.
Singing your praises, Sandy.
Yeah. So I see that both Andy and Holly have their hands up. Andy?
I don't know if Holly had anything to follow up on what's already been said. I had a summation thing that I wanted to make sure we include in the report. So Holly, were you?
Holly, I think Andy is saying you should go first.
Yeah, and I was just going to, say almost exactly what Paul just said, is that the closing out of capital is part of a year-end process where the departments have to justify what they have left when they plan to spend it. I will be working on that very soon. It is unfortunately very, very close to the end of the fiscal year already. So I go straight from budget craziness to end of year craziness. And I can try to work with either Jen or Sandy to see if we can get some updates on the outstanding capital balances, but just that they will be changing in the next couple of months anyways. So, again, apologies for not getting to that. It was a very stressful budget season. And we can work on that, and they will be changing in the next couple of months.
Yes, so Holly, one of the things, as you do that, what Sonia had, working with Sean, said, if there's a similar purpose that we had in the next year's budget as a line, we could repurpose it. So it, Paul, I know it can all come back to cash, but that helped us out last year on a couple of things where the new requests could move away because it turned out it was a school kind of transfer. So it was, I mean, either way is fine, but one way makes your FY25 capital plan eases some of the stress in it. So that's up to staff to be thinking that out. But there were some that were nice matches that was in the same general category. So it could be repurposed rather than brought to freeze cash and then figure out what to do with it. So Andy?
Yeah, what I wanted to do is to make a suggestion for the final report, and when we write up the report to the council regarding our recommendations on the CIP, and that is that there's been a lot of discussion today about things that were needed or that were not funded, and that hard choices had to be made. And it gets back to this question that has been involved in our discussions for years: how much to spend on capital and how much to spend on operating. And there's always a point where there's pressure to decrease capital, and in order to do something that is seen as really important at the moment for operating budget. And I think that we have known from years of experience that that's a mistake. And the policy, the financial policy of the town is a minimum of 10%. And for the last couple of years, we've gone to 10.5 because we felt we really needed it, and because we felt that if you don't do the investment in the short run, you may have a little bit more money for operations. In the long run, there's great cost that comes from postponing capital and delaying our maintenance and getting into the kind of backlog that we have in so many of our buildings that we've just been chipping away at now. And when the former finance committee in the days of our town meeting form of government came up with a minimum 10%, at that point we were probably around 6% of our budget was going to capital, and we were digging a huge hole for ourselves. And the hard decision that that finance committee made was to say, we need to move it to 10% in order to get out of this. It has, in the end, proven to be right, because we're still struggling to make hard decisions on capital, but at least we're beginning to get out of that hole we were in for many years. And so when we created the guidelines for the current budget process, and we, as a finance committee, recommended and the council agreed to and included in the guidelines 10.5%, it was with that reality in mind. And I think that we need to make sure that we create a reminder right now at a time when there's a lot of pressure on that we hear about, that we should be reducing capital. I don't think we should be reducing capital. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Thanks, Andy. I see Paul's hand is up, and Holly, I don't know whether you had something to add or it just didn't go down. So Paul.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention two things. One is we've been preparing for a presentation to the bond rating agency, Standard & Poor's, this later this week. And the council and the finance committee have multiple audiences, and you hear from some of the audiences every night. Every time you have a meeting, people come in who we serve and we report to the general public, and you hear about the need for services and requests for services. But we have other audiences too, and one of those audiences are the bond rating agencies, because they're the ones who, in very real terms, can determine the fate of all of our capital expenditures. So as we're preparing many things that Andy just referenced, they care about those things. They want to know the financial stability of our town and our finances. And they look at, are you continuing to make contributions to OPEB, and where are you on your pension? They want to know what the liabilities are, just what you heard on the audit today. They want to know a lot about what are you doing for your capital investments? Are you maintaining that? Because a lot of communities, when they start to slide down a bad path, they start to cannibalize their capital expenditures to pay for operating costs, and that's a slippery slope. And so I think all those things, those core fundamental foundational things about what makes a town maintain a strong financial footing, is what the town of Amherst is known for and is seen throughout the state, and as having that sort of self-discipline for making those hard choices. So that's one thing. And the second one is just a little anecdote. As staff we're leaving the council meeting last night, Jen turned to Holly and said, "Hey, I meant to tell you, I just set up the FY26 budget files on the server," and Holly about lost it. So we're starting to talk about FY26. It's like sort of a cruel and unusual comment by Jen, but it's like where we are. We start to set up right away.
Bernie.
Yeah, what Paul said. My little brother used to work for Moody's and used to be one of those people that would go in and tear a town's budget apart. And it's really important that the town of Amherst, people understand that the town of Amherst has to be a going concern. You have to think, as difficult as it may be, you have to think in corporate terms. And having worked long times with tax exempt not-for-profit organizations, you still have to be a going concern. You still have to be able to retain revenues. You still have to be able to make plans to move forward and to cover unseen expenses. There's a lot that goes into this, and I very much appreciate the work that, while I do have my criticisms, I very much appreciate the work that our finance team and Paul does, and hopefully we will have a new finance director before too terribly long. We've sent Paul a couple of referrals from the committee I'm on, so we'll press forward. But the meeting with Standard & Poor's or Moody's or any of the other rating agencies is very critical, because if that can cause, we can avoid a lot of costs by having them put a seal of approval on the way Amherst manages its finances. So now I'll get off my soapbox.
Thanks, Bernie. Mandy.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that was just said by Andy, Bernie, and Paul, and especially in terms of, I think it's unwise to even consider reducing capital to do operating. It's what got us into this situation to begin with back in the 2008 crisis, when we essentially did that. And we've been digging out for a decade to at least get back into this position. And I'd hate to see us go through that cycle again. But I did want to say, I forgot to say at the beginning of everything I asked, that I actually do, when we're comparing the capital improvement plan to the financial guidelines and to the town manager's performance goals, we basically meet them. There were a couple that obviously I had some questions about, but I do think the plan itself meets those guidelines and the goals. And so in that sense, as we get towards voting later on, there's a few things we might want to point out, but I want to thank the manager and the entire departments and all for putting forth a plan that basically does meet the financial guidelines that were adopted last year, and the manager's goals, or at least will help the manager meet his performance goals over the course of the year, and has those thoughts in there.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up. So other than Sandy and others, you heard a couple comments on specific tables. So if there are line items that are still a duplicate, those, as we go in, one of the comments we made in the JCPC report to the town manager, but it's clear in what was just laid out to us, is that as we make decisions with some of the big cost items to fund them with debt, and as buildings come on, we're squeezed even more in the out years than we would otherwise be on terms of new projects and cash capital. So as you look out across the even the 5-year plan, and it would look worse if we did 10 years. And this is assuming if DPW, we actually can get to the point there is a new DPW something, because it's penciled in right now with a number, but that's what's starting to have a crunch. So that is one of the reasons we went up to 10.5, the large expenditures to be able to get over a hump. It is absolutely putting a squeeze on operating budgets. So I don't think we should put aside that. We also brought in an entire new department in the operating budget, which puts a squeeze on money available. So as we turn to the other departments, we need to be thinking these are choices we're making, and they have consequences. So that's what I was delighted is that we balanced FY25. It came in $2 to $3 million in a deficit. So that didn't look very good. And the other comment just on praise, way back when, before I was on JCP, but I was an observer, my comment was, I don't understand how we have a capital improvement plan that is balanced in year 1 and has extreme deficits in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. That does not look like a plan to me. That just looks like we pushed everything off. But we've gotten out of doing that. We're much more disciplined in, almost balanced, nearly balanced, with some identification of where pieces could move. And I think that's just a huge improvement in trying to think through the future. So I have to thank, it's a lot of staff that's working on that, including the departments. The departments themselves are making choices. So thank you all. And I'm not seeing any other hands up, so I will see whether anyone wants to make a motion to adjourn.
Could we just
Sure.
preview what's going to happen on Friday? Who's coming in?
Yes, so the Friday schedule has May 10th.
This Friday, we're starting with, sorry, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
Kathy.
go ahead, Athena.
We have Sharon coming in to do the libraries at 10. Then we have Pamela Nolan-Young coming at 10:30 to go over DEI. We have facilities at 11, Jeremiah, Rob, and Dave. The town manager budget at 11:30, and then we'll have another opportunity for overall budget questions at the end of the meeting.
Good, thank you.
And for anyone who didn't see it, Athena can resend it, but each of the next schools, both elementary and regional, are on Tuesday, May 14th, but there is a schedule with the departments on it that's been agreed on.
And that's in your packet for today. And Paul, I sent it out to staff, both to you and Sandy and Holly and Jen, and the staff department heads who are coming to attend the meetings.
Super, thank you.
Athena, the police can't make it on the 17th. Have we rescheduled them?
That's right. They're coming in at 2 o'clock on the 28th.
28th, okay.
Yep, they're on the schedule for a later date. They couldn't make it on the date that we had originally chosen.
That's fine.
Mandy has a hand up. Yep.
Mandy has her hand up.
Yeah, we had projected revenues and any questions related to that on today's agenda. Is that just moving to Friday when Paul is around?
I think if that's okay with Paul, we'll do that then.
Sure, as long as Sandy's here.
Yeah, I'm seeing that we have it's 5 minutes of 4, so rather than opening up a new topic, Mandy, I think we'll just move it to that section.
Okay.
So now Any
And then
other, go
sorry,
on.
I should be raising my hand and I keep forgetting. If there are questions about any of those topics for this Friday, it would be helpful to have those sooner than later so I can communicate those to the department heads so they're ready to get to the meeting. So I'd have to pull up my notes from the last meeting. I know Bob is doing the library. I forget who's assigned the other
So I
three
was
departments.
assigned all the general government sections, which includes DEI, the Paul stuff, and
Oh, right, that's right. Yep, and
so I sent them last
those.
night,
Yes, thank you.
along with a whole bunch of general questions that kind of relate to revenues. But I think Kathy was doing some revenue questions too.
That's right. Thank you.
I had another question, which is the timings are great. If we don't say take a half an hour for libraries, will we have staff there to be able to move on, or are we gonna have some dead time? I know there's a purpose to the timings, but I've not been to a review in a while in terms of timing that it does take. So is there some leeway in that if something goes quicker?
Yeah, usually the department heads will come at the start of the meeting, and I've let them know they can just leave their cameras off until the committee's ready to take up their department. And I can continue to communicate if it feels like the committee is moving through things more quickly, then we can make adjustments, or more slowly, then we might need to move things around, and we'll go from
And
there.
we had a department heads meeting this morning. We alerted the department heads about the upcoming meetings, but also that it's not their job to describe everything that's happening in their departments. It's really about answering your questions, addressing the key components. It's not a full, like, we have 4 people, we have 32 people. That's not the point of this. So to help them, having the questions in advance is really helpful to sort of shape the conversation.
And if I could add to that, Paul, I think in the past we had asked the departments to do a little bit more of that, and seen their meetings with the finance committee as an opportunity to celebrate all the great things that they've done, the accomplishments that are in the budget. And so we're continuing to think about how we can do that in a different format that's not taking up this really tight timeline in finance committee.
So the one exception on the list for Friday in terms of things we can look at and send questions in is the library. Athena, I don't know whether we have a library budget, but if it's already in the packet, I'll look at it. So I'm not assigned to it, but just the request to get things in advance. All the others are in the budget book. So I know what the line item is for the library.
Right, and then the budget from the trustees is posted on that upcoming budget page if you want to see the
great
more detail. And we did ask after the finance committee conversation last time, members said that they didn't want a full presentation and so on. You wanted Sharon to come in and talk about revenues and staffing and so on. So I shared that with her, so she's going to be ready for us on Friday.
So it is.
And I already reviewed the budget, Kathy, so I posted some questions. So
okay, perfect. Thank you. So now I'm looking around. Does anyone have any more comments? I'm not trying to close out the meeting to close off discussion. If there isn't any, I make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And I need to go around and do a vote. Andy?
Yes.
Alicia?
Yes.
Kathy is a yes. Mandy? Mandy seconded. Bernie?
Oh, Shakespeare wrote, adjourning is such sweet sorrow. But I agree.
Matt? If Matt is still there.
Well, if we adjourn, it won't matter.
Okay. And Kathy is a yes if you didn't hear me. So I think it's unanimous that we're adjourning. And we'll have the
ask me, but it's an aye. I'm an aye.
Okay. Oh, Bob, I missed you. The phone down at the bottom. Sorry, Bob. Great.
No problem. Aye.
It is amazing. You don't notice there's a phone at the bottom. So thank you very much, everyone. We are adjourned at 4:00.
Thank you.
Thank you.